Now, yesterday, the Climate and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, was spruiking his plan to boost the so-called safeguards mechanism that will force more than 200 of the nation's biggest emitters to cut their greenhouse gas emissions. This plan has been described, even by former Labor frontbencher Joel Fitzgibbon, as a carbon tax.
There's a thing called a safeguards mechanism, which is a carbon constraint or a carbon tax, whatever you might like to call it.
So we have a de facto carbon tax underway for large industries, and now there's a new plan that will effectively be a carbon tax on our cars. And it's another breach of faith by Labor, a U-turn from a policy they took to the 2019 election that they lost, but they dropped it for this year's poll. Hey presto, it's back again. The so-called fuel efficiency standard will see the government tell car companies what to sell. It will try to force you and me out of our petrol and diesel cars into electric cars.
What it would do is it would require manufacturers to send, potentially, affordable electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, no emissions vehicles to Australia. At the moment, there's no obligation on them to do so.
Wonderful, hey? Bugger what car you want to buy. Bugger your assessment of value for money. The government believes it knows what cars are right for you and at what price, and it doesn't like what you're buying at the moment.
At the moment, frankly, I'm sorry to say, Australia is a dumping ground for cars which would not be able to be sent to other countries.
Bowen himself turned up in his expensive virtue signalling electric vehicle, the type that are already subsidised by state and federal governments, and he wants to force more of us in that direction. Look at the billionaires on this too. The billionaires around the place love this stuff. Bowen actually had one of the climate activist billionaires on hand to support his push. And of course, back in the US, Elon Musk's Tesla thrives on this sort of government intervention.
The time for cheap politics, for saying it'll end the weekend or take away use, is over. Australians want a sensible discussion about how we can get cheaper, better cars in Australia. We're in a cost of living crisis. Petrol's very expensive. If you have an electric vehicle, you never need to lift the nozzle at a petrol station ever again.
Yeah, but you will need reliable and affordable electricity, and Labor's climate plans are only going to exacerbate our ongoing energy crisis. And if you want to see where this is heading, there's no better place to look than Europe, which is about a decade ahead of us on all this economic self-harm. The ABC last night put a cute and cuddly and very deceptive story to air, a lot of spin on Europe's energy crisis, looking at Spain, where the government there is intervening drastically to try to reduce energy use, banning people from setting their air conditioners any lower than 27 degrees.
But despite an oppressive heat wave, public places here are turning their thermostats up.
It's crazy. I'm sorry, but it's very crazy.
Yeah, I don't think that is good enough, 27 degrees.
The new Spanish law is part of a wider European effort to reduce gas consumption by 15%. While Spain isn't dependent on piped Russian gas, it's offering to cut usage in solidarity and send more supplies to its neighbours.
OK, so the restrictions are drastic. The ABC kind of tells us that. But they make it all about Vladimir Putin. It's all about a gas shortage and Spain helping out its European neighbours. And in the ABC's rendition of what's going on there, a modern, sophisticated economy running short of energy is actually just a heartwarming human interest story.
Despite running a deli full of meat and cheese, Lola Arroyo is happy to comply.
It's crazy that the rest of Europe has to depend on Putin's gas and energy. Anything that's new is hard to adjust to, but I believe these measures will help us.
The streets have got darker too. Shops have been ordered to switch off their lights when they close for the night. The bars are still buzzing though. Fans are now doing the heavy lifting as Europe tries to build its energy stores for the colder months. So how will Spaniards cope with these hotter temperatures and less powerful air conditioning? Like this, wearing more casual clothes. In fact, the country's Prime Minister has ordered public officials to start dressing down, and he wants other Spaniards to follow suit.
Oh, how cute. Maybe they'll start wearing shorts. Doesn't this seem odd to you? A country that apparently doesn't rely on Russian gas, rationing energy in order to help out other countries that do rely on Russian gas. It makes no sense at all, does it? Did you, like me, wonder why the ABC never bothered to explain anything about the Spanish energy system or examine why Spain might be light on for energy? Ah, what a pity. Perhaps the reporter's battery was flat, because a few minutes on Google and he would have discovered that in recent years Spain has shut down almost all of its coal-fired generation. In fact, as this report frames it, the Spanish government committed to making its electricity system 100% renewable by the middle of the century, banning all new coal, oil and gas extraction, ending all fuel subsidies and making all new vehicles emissions-free by 2040. Not only does it all sound so familiar, it also suddenly makes sense. Spain, like us, has deliberately made itself energy poor in pursuit of climate action. Just like us, this is what they've been doing to their coal-fired power stations. Yep, they blew that one up just last year, and now they're rationing power. I reckon people around the world will eventually revolt against governments committing these heinous acts against the interests of their own people. But what about the ABC report, completely ignoring what Spain has done to its own energy system, trying to blame all their woes on some desperate link to Russia and Putin? Why would they do that, do you think? Do you think they don't want people to know the reality about climate and energy policies? Surely not. I mean, only last year, the ABC sent a foreign correspondent team to a Spanish coal mining town and also to a coal mining town in the US. And they compared how the Spanish socialist government and the US capitalists were handling the transition from coal to the new net zero nirvana. And who do you reckon the ABC had coming out on top?
Well, this is Spain's last coal-fired power plant. These days, of course, it's using imported coal, until recently even Australian coal. But all that's coming to an end, because in a few short years, the Portuguese owner, EDP, wants to turn this coal plant into a clean, green hub. The plan is to generate green hydrogen, using electricity from wind and solar to split hydrogen fuel from water.
It's all going to be so beautiful and easy. The same old slogans, the same old promises and the same old result. A dire energy crisis that the ABC and plenty of others now try to pretend away. Instead of watching Europe fail on these policy initiatives and learning salient lessons, our Labor government, like the ABC, thinks Europe is leading the way.
Spain was the first country to implement just transition. It is struggling to keep the people's trust and racing to switch to the energy of the future. How it succeeds will be watched around the globe.
Well, not necessarily. Not anymore at the ABC, that's for sure. Now that it's already gone to custard, the ABC is back in Spain, but averting its eyes from the real reasons for Spain's energy crisis. This stuff is really important. Now, sure, the ABC's deceptions are a disgrace, but this issue is far more important than a biased and ideological public broadcaster. This denial of reality goes way beyond the media. It reaches into all levels of government, civil society and business. We can see the energy strife in Europe. It's the living experiment, a more advanced test case of the policies that are already causing pain here. But instead of learning from Europe's missteps, Bowen and Albanese are hell-bent on catching up with the European failed renewable energy strategies. Bowen said today that Europe was his guide for his electric car push. No Australian can claim not to have been warned about this. We've seen the consequences, but we're increasing our self-harm all the same. And the great tragedy for mainstream voters is that even half of the coalition is caught up in this reality-denying virtue signalling. I mean, listen to this Liberal frontbencher just going along with this plan to have the government tell you what to drive and to increase your costs along the way.
This is part of the economy that does need to decarbonise if we are ultimately to achieve net zero by 2050 and to achieve the types of interim targets that Australia should be striving for. And we have to make sure that it's not just in the space of electricity emissions, which dominate much of the discussion, but other sectors of the economy, such as transport emissions, that there are changes made.
And they wonder why they lost the election. Imagine if they're silly enough to just cheer along as Labor deepens our energy crisis. Imagine if they go to a second election without providing an alternative approach on energy and climate.